All right, so we're starting with, let's see, this one. This is from Raphael. He says, how do you handle getting customers in the same service area? For example, a tree service company hires you to optimize their business search performance for X for whatever city. Then you get another tree service company to do the same for the same city. You can't promise first place to both for the same city. Do you just block certain locations after you've already taken a customer in the location? No, I only do one as a client per city, per location, per area. If I'm going to do additional, then I'm going to build lead gen assets, as many of them as I need in a particular city, and then I'm just going to sell leads. And that way, I'm not competing. I'm not doing something that I would consider unethical, or that I would have a hard time kind of reconciling with myself, if that makes sense. So I don't do that. If I'm doing where I'm going to take on a client for on retainer based, so a traditional or typical kind of agency client relationship, then I'm going to only take one client per in the same industry per city, if that makes sense. Because again, I don't want to compete. There's only been one time where I've had two clients in the same industry and that targeted the same areas, and they were roofing contractors that were identical twin brothers, and they each had their own contracting companies. And it was funny as shit. And this is not a joke. They're identical twin brothers, and they both hired me to do roofing contractor SEO for them and leads, and they serviced the same areas. And it was funny as hell because it was always a battle every time one of them, and they were always like number one and number two. But they would, swap positions because of just optimization stuff. And I would always get a phone call from the other brother when his position would get pushed down to number two. And he'd be like, why do you like my brother more than me? And it was funny as hell. It was a fun engagement with those guys. One of those guys are still my clients, as a matter of fact. He has been since 2013. So like almost 11 years. So one of those roofing contractors is still a client of mine today. But that was the only time I did it. And that was because they both agreed to it. And it was kind of like a friendly competition between the two. And but I wouldn't do it any other way. If I was going to target the same, more like try to provide leads or SEO services in the same location for the same industry, then I would only have one retainer client, and then the rest of those would be lead gen assets that I would own and control. And that way I wouldn't have any ethical issues to kind of reconcile with myself, if that makes sense. It would just be, hey, here's what we have, and here's what I provide, and you guys can, agree to it or not. And that's basically it. Does that make sense? And by the way that I do that in some areas, I still to this day have a few locations where I have leads that I generate and sell on a pay per lead basis. And some of those contractors are aware that lead, this is what they agreed to initially, was that the lead can be sold more than once. I won't sell it more than 3 times. That's the maximum amount. But they understand that if they decide they want to go in, I use the Lead Simplify app for that, which is Mike Martin's product. And so if they basically, when a lead comes in a particular zip code area, they get a text message and an email notifications telling them, hey, a new lead has come in, and it shows them some information from that lead, but it's redacted. So it's not the full information. And then it triggers them to go into the Lead Simplify app, or prompts them to go into the Lead Simplify app. And if they want to purchase the lead, they can for whatever the lead price is. And I usually charge $25 for those kind of leads. It depends on the area, but usually it's $25. And if they purchase it, then it deducts $25 from their balance, whatever they preloaded. And then it unredacts the information so that they have the full information. But they're aware that lead can be sold up to 2 more times to other contractors in the same area. And so it very rarely ever gets sold 3 times in the areas that I work in, but often it will get sold twice. And so, and that's another way that you can do it ethically, is if you want to sell, in my opinion, if you want to sell leads, you could always, generate a lead and say, listen, I can sell this lead more than, as long as it's agreed to up front. If a contractor wants exclusivity, then I will charge $60 for the lead in that case. If I was doing like a $25 lead in a shared setting, if that makes sense, and I can sell it up to 3 times, and that means the most revenue I'm going to make on that is $75. And this is just an example. But if a contractor in that area wants exclusivity, then I'll tell them, okay, fine, but I want $60 per lead. And then you'll be the only one to get them, if that makes sense. And the reason I do that, it's a little bit of a discount that if I were to sell it, than if I were to sell it 3 times. But since it's not that often that the lead ends up being sold 3 times, it still ends up being a little bit more to me. And it provides the contractor with exclusivity, meaning that lead isn't going to go to anybody else other than him. But here's what I always recommend to contractors. If they want it, I'll do that for them. But I always tell them, hey, listen, the prospect that it's asked that, you're buying the lead for, the contact information, is likely going to be contacting other contractors for leads anyway, or estimates anyways. So, if you don't mind, it'll lower your cost per lead price. And then I'll end up selling it to one of the competitors that's likely going to come out and be competing against you for the quote anyway. You know what I mean? So it's up to the contractor. I'm transparent about it up front. Like, this is your option, exclusivity or pay per lead on a shared setting, if that's the engagement that we agree to. That makes sense. So hopefully that's clear. But that's part of the reason why I like the lead gen business, guys, because you can do other things there that gives you more control than if you're, without, in my opinion, the ethical issues that you may encounter doing traditional SEO.